The room was quiet, just the soft hum of an old guitar and the glow of studio lights on a man who had seen everything. At 57, Keith Urban sat alone in his Nashville studio. No crowd, no cameras, no bright lights, just him, a microphone, and a truth he had kept hidden for years. After 19 years of marriage, the country star who once sang about forever love finally said the words fans never expected to hear. But when he spoke, it wasn't with anger, and it wasn't a scandal. It was something far more surprising, an honest confession. Because behind the music, behind the fame, and behind every perfect red carpet smile, there was a man quietly breaking down and building himself back up. Tonight, we're diving deep into the story Keith never told the newspapers. A journey through fame, love, addiction, and finding peace that ends not with a broken heart, but with understanding. And once you hear what he finally admitted, you'll never see Keith Urban, or love itself, the same way again. If you want the real story behind the spotlight, not just the gossip, tap subscribe and let's begin. The man behind the music. Before the silence, there was sound, the kind that could fill huge stadiums and still feel personal. For years, Keith Urban was the face of perfection in country music. Blue eyes, leather boots, a guitar hanging low, and a smile that made even heartbreak sound hopeful. He wasn't just a musician. He was like a dream, the golden boy who made pain sound beautiful, the dreamer from Australia who won over Nashville and captured Hollywood's heart. To the world, Keith seemed untouchable. He had everything, the awards, the cheering crowds, the beautiful wife, and the life every young artist dreams about when they first pick up a guitar. But fame has a strange way of making things look perfect on the outside while hiding the cracks. Behind that confident smile was a man quietly drowning, not in failure, but in everyone's expectations. Every night, he stood under blinding stage lights with thousands of faces cheering his name, yet somehow, he felt completely alone. The louder the crowd, the quieter his soul became. As his songs climbed the charts, so did his loneliness, the kind that no spotlight could brighten. Because what fans didn't see was the price of always being the perfect man. The one who smiled, even when his heart was heavy. The one who said, "I'm fine," when the silence between shows said otherwise. He once admitted, fame isn't freedom, it's just a louder kind of loneliness. And you could hear that truth hiding in his voice. The way he turned sadness into melody, the way every lyric felt like a secret message wrapped in music. When he sang about heartbreak, it wasn't acting, it was confession. He made pain sound romantic because he'd lived it, again and again. Every applause, every encore, every award, it all felt temporary. The lights would fade, the room would empty, and there he'd be, just Keith, sitting with his guitar, wondering if anyone really knew him at all. He had spent years building a version of himself that the world loved, yet somewhere along the way, he lost the version that simply wanted to be understood. And that was the real tragedy behind the fame. Not addiction, not heartbreak, but the quiet, invisible pain of being loved for the performance, not the person. But what Keith didn't know then was that fate was about to introduce him to someone who could finally see through the spotlight, someone who would change everything he thought he knew about love and about himself. Because before he could understand who he'd become, the world needed to remember where he came from. Small-town beginnings. Long before the fame, before the awards, before the world even knew his name, there was a shy kid sitting on the floor of a small house in Caboolture, Australia, running his fingers over the frets of a guitar with blistered hands. His family didn't have much. His father sold instruments part-time, and his mother filled their tiny home with the voices of Merle Haggard, Don Williams, and Glenn Campbell. That sound became his escape. Keith Lionel Urban wasn't the loud kid in class, or the one who dreamed of playing sports. He was the quiet one, awkward, soft-spoken, and endlessly fascinated by music that seemed to come from a different world. While other kids played rugby, Keith chased rhythm. His classmates teased him for listening to American country music, calling it old people's music. But he didn't care. He felt something in those songs, a kind of honesty he didn't hear anywhere else. When he was just 6, his father noticed his love for music and bought him his first real guitar. It wasn't fancy, just a used instrument with scratches and worn frets, but for Keith, it was everything. He played until his fingers hurt, then played some more. When the strings broke, he tied them back together. When they got rusty, he cleaned them carefully. He wasn't just learning chords, he was teaching himself how to speak through sound. By the time he was 9, he was performing at local talent shows, standing nervously in front of small-town crowds who didn't yet realize they were watching a future global star. He didn't have the confidence or polish of an entertainer. What he had was honesty, a raw, shaky voice that carried more emotion than skill. Judges smiled, parents clapped, and Keith went home replaying every mistake, determined to get better. His perfectionism started early, not because he was vain, but because he was grateful. His parents had sacrificed for his dream, especially his father. When Keith turned 12, his dad did something incredible. He mortgaged their family home to buy him a top-quality guitar. "Make it count," he said. And Keith never forgot those words. That guitar wasn't just an instrument, it was a promise. He spent endless hours watching videos of Chet Atkins and copying every move, every slide, every subtle bend of the string. While other kids hung out with friends, he was alone in his room chasing tone, the perfect sound that could make a stranger feel what he felt. Those nights, music became his first real friend. The guitar didn't judge him, it didn't laugh, it just listened. By 15, he was performing in local bars, the youngest musician in rooms filled with smoke, laughter, and heartbreak. He'd play for people too drunk to notice, but he gave them everything anyway. Each night was another lesson: how to win over an audience, how to handle rejection, and how to keep believing even when nobody else did. He once said, "Music was the only language I didn't stutter in." And maybe that's why he never stopped playing, because the moment he picked up that guitar, the world made sense. In a small Australian town where dreams were supposed to stay small, Keith Urban found a way to make his sing. The strings never judged him, they saved him. And with that salvation in his hands, he was ready to chase something bigger, a dream called Nashville. Nashville, the dream and the struggle. By the early 90s, Keith Urban had outgrown the small-town bars of Caboolture. The applause was nice, but he wanted something more, not just success, but a place where his kind of music actually belonged. For years, he'd seen the word Nashville printed on the backs of the records he loved, and it sounded like a promise. So in 1992, at just 24, he packed his guitar, his hope, and not much else, and boarded a plane toward a dream that would test every part of him. When he arrived, the dream didn't look golden. It looked tough. The streets of Nashville were crowded with hungry musicians, each carrying the same belief that one song could change everything. Keith was just another face with a guitar, another hopeful voice in a city overflowing with them. He was broke, sleeping in cramped apartments with thin walls, where the hum of old air conditioners mixed with the faint sound of guitars from the next room. Sometimes he'd go to bed hungry, staring at the ceiling, promising himself that tomorrow he'd play better, and maybe someone would finally notice. He took every gig he could find: backup guitarist for singers who barely remembered his name, demo sessions for a few dollars an hour, open mics that paid in beer and applause. Most nights, he performed for half-interested strangers who clapped out of habit, not admiration. But Keith didn't care. Every bar was a battlefield, and he kept playing like it was the Grand Ole Opry. He wasn't chasing fame, he was running from failure. That hunger became his engine. It was survival, not ambition. Every rejection, every empty wallet, every long night carrying amplifiers through the rain, it carved a toughness into him that no hit song could ever teach. He found two other musicians who shared his desperation, and together they formed a band called The Ranch. Three dreamers, three believers, one mission: to make the world listen. They played anywhere that would have them: smoky bars, rodeos, state fairs, often driving hundreds of miles for a single show. The crowds were small, the money worse, but the fire in their music was real. Still, the loneliness of the road began to creep in. He spent birthdays in motel rooms, eating cheap takeout and scribbling lyrics that felt too raw to sing out loud. When exhaustion came, he found comfort in a bottle. At first just a drink to calm the nerves, but slowly it became a crutch. The line between passion and pain blurred. He once said, "It's not ambition that keeps you alive, it's hunger." That hunger pushed him past limits most people never reach. He'd finish a show at 2 a.m., then stay up until sunrise rewriting lyrics, chasing the perfect sound. And even when nobody seemed to care, Keith refused to stop. Years of struggle hardened him, but they also purified him. He learned humility, he learned discipline. And most of all, he learned who he was when the dream didn't love him back. Then, after almost 10 years of being invisible, the break finally came. In 1999, his first American album hit radio. And suddenly, the quiet kid from Caboolture was a rising name in country music. Songs like "But for the Grace of God" and "Where the Blacktop Ends" lit up the charts, and people began to say what he'd been dying to hear his whole life. That voice is different. The fame came fast: awards, interviews, headlines, but beneath the success, the same loneliness lingered. He'd escaped failure, but he hadn't yet found peace. He'd learned to make the world listen. Now he had to learn how to live with what it heard. And that's when his story took a turn, one that would test everything he thought he knew about love, redemption, and himself. Quick pause: if stories like this move you, hit subscribe. We share the real lives behind the headlines every week.